Welcome to The Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where purpose meets performance and leaders are built to shift legacies. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, executive strategist, speaker, and the secret weapon behind leaders who drive transformation at the highest levels. Each episode delivers bold truths, power skills, and real-world strategies to help you lead with precision, show up with presence, and build the kind of influence that outlasts trends. This is the space where high-impact decisions are born, where influence is intentional, and where the bold don't just lead, they change the game. So if you're ready to rise, ready to lead, and ready to create the kind of impact that moves markets, missions, and minds, you're in the right place. Welcome to The Game Changer. It's going to be another dynamic episode where we're helping you to shift your leadership dynamics. I have an interesting guest for us today. We have Greg Kaiser, who's here, and he has something absolutely phenomenal to say for those who are in leadership, as well as those who actually aspire to leadership roles. So I'm going to encourage you to grab your pen, grab your paper, take copious notes, and listen up. So Greg likes to read. So let's begin with this. I want to change that. Let me start over. I'm going to cut that. So Greg likes to read. So let's begin with the literary analogy. Shakespeare didn't write Macbeth or his sonnets the first time he picked up a pen. He started with the basics, learning the ABCs, forming words, and constructing sentences. With lots of practice, he crafted beautiful works of art. The same principle applies to the art of management. Companies that train well have a 24%, that's a big jump, higher profit margin. So wouldn't it be great to be a part of that? I think so. You already know the basics, but how do you tie it all together? This is where the management mastery can help. They teach using simple yet sophisticated tools that focus on the critical activities every manager performs. Greg's 40-year management career covered a lot of ground. We're going to talk about that. He's experienced the same management obstacles as you and can explain ways to deal with them. So let's welcome Greg. Hey,
well,
Greg.
Dr. Sharalyn, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. And since you were talking about literary things, I was going over some notes before we jumped on today. I'm like, oh, right, this is the Game Changer podcast. So I have a book recommendation that I'll put out right at the very beginning, which could help these aspiring managers and leaders you're talking about. It's called The Great Game of Business.
The Great Game of Business.
It's by Jack Stack. Just he was a practitioner. He ran companies. Just a fascinating book about how you work with and engage employees through, the word wasn't popular then, but it is popular now, radical transparency. He would meet with the people in his company and say, hey, this is what's happening. This is what we need to do to be successful, and lay it out for them. Like, have a very candid discussions. He's the CEO of the company. He would go out and talk to the people on the line like they were his executive staff.
Wow.
And it's just a very well, it's probably, I forget when it was written. I should have looked that up, but I didn't.
That's okay. We're going to let you slide.
The book is aged very well. So that may help folks that have never heard of that one, because I'm not sure that it was a huge bestseller like, Find Your Why or something like that. But very solid book if you want to understand the mechanics of running a business.
Perfect. Thank you for that. You're a giver, giving already. So I have a question for you. How did you come across this book? Do you recall?
It was, yes, I do recall, but I wish my memory were ever so slightly better. It was recommended in another article that I read. So I read all the time. I like to read. You have books behind you. I have books behind me. So like, we read. And it was recommended. I never heard of it. Like, here's another one that this book was recommended in something I read the other day. It's called Making People Productive. It's out of print. It was published in 1985. And in the article that referenced it, it said the book never got the traction it should have because it was written by a college professor.
Okay.
And I forget who published the book, and it wasn't some big splashy launch or anything. But you get the book and you're going through it and you're like, wow, this is really practical. People could use this. So, that great game of business, I read about it in an article. So, in my mind, at least, that's a great way to get new content is to have somebody recommend it. Hey, I read this. This would
Absolutely.
help you.
Well, thank you for that. So you gave us two great resources that we'll have to check out and then get back with you and let you know what we think. So I have a question for you. And I'm going to pivot and go somewhere different from where I was originally going since you mentioned books and reading. Do you believe that leaders should be readers? Do they need to read?
Yes, I very strongly, let me underline that word. I very strongly believe that leaders should be readers. So I'll give you another recommendation. There's a guy named Jeff Brown who has a podcast called Read to Lead,
Okay.
and he reviews business books. And I've been following this guy for probably 5 or 6 years. And he had a really good, he puts a little blog thing out too. He had a really good 3 bullet point list the other day. And he said, things that you think are simple, many people have never heard of. Insights that you have gained, others haven't gained yet. I'm like, I'm guilty of this myself all the time. I was talking to somebody this week, a live example. I said something about the SMART methodology: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant,
Right.
and time bound. And they're looking at me. This is a fairly accomplished person. And they said, what is this SMART methodology? And I'm like, I've been using it for so many years. I just assume everybody knows this. And they don't. So
Wow.
sometimes you have to like throttle back a little bit and probe probe just a bit and say, hey, there's this tool that I use. It's called this. So if they answer, hey, I'm familiar with that, well, then the conversation goes one way. But if they say, well, what is that? Then you take the conversation the other way and say, oh, let me tell you a little bit more about it. And this is why it works so well.
Mhm.
So Jeff
Perfect.
Brown, read the lead.
Read to lead. I love that. So let me ask you a question. You talk about some insights that every manager should aspire to, every manager should actually do, and communication is one. Anything else that you would actually share with us?
Yeah. So the communication, and I talk about this a lot. So if I start going on too long, do one of these and I'll stop.
Okay, let me make sure I got it
Yeah.
right. Okay, okay.
No, so I developed this framework. I call it the management framework because I'm not very good at naming things. It is a management framework.
Okay.
And sitting in the middle of it is communication. And to your point, what are the other things managers need to think about? So that it's a circle. So think of it as a clock face. Up at 12 o'clock, you have planning.
Hmm.
Okay, business is planned. You move over to 3 o'clock, you have people. Well, you need people to carry out your plans. You move down to 6 o'clock and you have directing. People need direction so they can go off and implement the plans. And then when you come over to 9 o'clock, you have measure and modify. Because you and I know this because we've been in business a long time. Things don't always go as planned. So
Right.
sometimes you have to go back and reorient. But if I've used this thing a bunch of times in my consulting work. It's a good diagnostic tool that if you can get people to understand, look at every single one of these activities that you engage in, planning and people and direction and measuring and modifying, you have to be continuously communicating. And it's the two-way communication, not I'm going to tell you what to do. There's a different word for that, and you can substitute
Right.
whichever one you'd like.
Absolutely. So why communication at the center?
That's how you synthesize all these activities. So some people don't like the word synthesize, like, well, that's like 4 or 5 syllables. It's kind of confusing. It's how you tie everything together.
Right. Absolutely.
So you build a plan, but if you don't tell anybody what the plan is and how they can accomplish it, well, you might as well not have the plan because it's not helping them. When you start talking about people, it's not just the person that you're selecting, it's the team that they're going to be a part of. Okay, what does this team need to take them to the next level? It's the whole
Right.
idea, people are role players.
Hmm.
I had a conversation with somebody this week and they were talking about somebody they were working with and they said, this person's really good technically and they're expert at what they do, but they have a hard time having difficult conversations with people, but they want to be an executive. I said, "Oh, this is so tough. That person will never be an executive." If you can't talk to people and say, hey, you're accountable for this, and yeah, it happened and you did great, do more of that, or no, it didn't happen, and here's what we need to do about it, you're just not cut out to be an executive. And the,
So
the
what
person,
advice did you give that leader? So I know you shared with them that the person isn't cut out for, but any other concrete advice that you gave them?
what I said is you have to figure out by talking to the person, engaging with them, and I'm a visual person. I said, you have to watch how they work because some of the things could just be training. They've never been trained how to have these tough conversations with people. There's a skill to that. There's an art to it too. But there's also, you can teach people the mechanics. Okay, first you say this, you listen for the response, then you say this, and you have some goal for the conversation. I said, but if their personality is just not inclined to do that, it might be really hard to train them to do that. Yeah, because you work with lots of executives. They like engaging with people. They talk to everybody. And
Some
they
of
listen. They
them.
listen to everybody.
Yes, the good ones do. Yes.
Okay. Well, I was being nice and putting them all in the good category.
This is the game changer. We can't. We got to tell the truth.
Yeah.
We got to make the clear delineation of what's
Yes.
good and what's great and what they do, because there are leaders out there, as you know, who
Oh
are
yeah.
in the roles who are not effective or they're not great at what they do. They are, performance driven or numbers driven, not necessarily people oriented and have the capability, but they're so focused. And I've seen those. Now, the caveat with that is those same individuals, they are executives, but I've seen them also drive the companies into the ground, if we were going to tell the truth, because they lack the dynamics that you're saying are essential to great leadership.
Exactly. And a different conversation I had this week with somebody about exactly what you said. The person's point was, but they get great results.
Hmm.
I said, okay, you mean quantitatively they get great results. But based on everything else you just told me, their turnover's horrible, the morale is terrible. Like this is not sustainable long term. Oh, so the question they asked is, I've heard fear is a great motivator. What have you heard about this? And I said, well, fear is a great motivator in the short term. It is
Right.
not a sustainable motivator.
Absolutely.
Because eventually people just don't, they're not fearful anymore. They'll either leave the organization or what they called this thing about a year ago, they quiet quit.
Yes.
They
Quiet quitting.
show up at
Mhm.
work, but they're not doing anything,
Right. Exactly. Yes.
which to me would be horrible. I wouldn't want to work in that environment, but people have bills to pay, they got kids in school, whatever. So they're making a decision, but an astute leader would pick up on that.
Right.
An engaged leader would pick up on that. But if their only focus is their quarterly numbers, people might people might not be as important to them if they have a long-term vision for the company that, hey, we're going to build this company into something great. You look at you look, historically at the companies that do great things, the tenure of their employees, how long people stay, is much higher than
Absolutely.
other types of companies.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, well, there's a reason for that.
Mhm.
People like to work there. They're
Correct,
motivated,
right, correctly.
they're
Correct.
motivated by like what the mission and the purpose of the company is.
Right.
And these are like, well, that's sort of a soft, squishy thing. No, it shows up in your numbers.
Absolutely. It does. And that's something that we should talk about, but we won't talk about that right now. I'll pivot and go somewhere different. You worked at Hershey's.
I did.
So I want you to share with us some key lessons you learned from leading Hershey's $300 million global supply chain transformation. What did you
Yes,
learn from that? What did you take from that?
that the biggest thing I learned from that is how to build a cross-functional team. Because that project was gigantic and it touched every single part of the company.
Hmm.
And it was also, let's call it 4 or 5 years long. We were still wrapping it up in the fifth year. It was mostly done. It's fascinating to me that someone who comes up in the sales organization in a company really don't know that many people in the operations side of the company. And someone who's grown up in the manufacturing side of the company, that part of operations, they don't know anybody in marketing. They don't know anybody in sales.
Right,
They say, why don't these people sell what we make? Like,
right,
no, the salespeople, because I've been in both of those roles. I said, the salespeople are saying, why don't you make what we sell? So
exactly.
you get them all together in the same room and say, okay, folks, we are under this umbrella of this thing called Hershey, pretty big company. And based on what we're doing, we're going to need to work with the IT department. We're going to need to work, and you pull. So I had bi-weekly, every other week meetings with all the functional leads. And I knew all these people because I like going around and meeting people and talking to them. It was fascinating when we started getting these people together, how many of them didn't know each other. And I've had this, so I carried that experience with me other places, to long-winded answer to your question, Dr. Sharalyn. I'm out doing a consulting engagement, and the COO came up to me and said, hey, I was watching you in that meeting this morning. I said, uh-huh. And he said, you knew everybody in the room. He's like, you've only been here 3 weeks. I said, well, there weren't that many people in the room. There's like 12, 15 people there. He's like, I didn't know everybody in the room. I'm like, well, I said, you brought me in to do this, this, and this, and sales and operations planning. I said, so it touches all parts of the company. So I have to go meet all these people. But here's a person that's at a C-suite job. And I'm like, why wouldn't you know the person running IT? It touches everything. It's the wiring for your business. It touches
Right.
everything in the business. And that's a simple example, but I've carried that with me that if you go out, it's the big picture systems type thinking, to use the more technical term, that a lot of people haven't been trained to do. Like, okay, you're a salesperson. Your job is to learn how to close sales. Okay, your job is also to communicate the sales you've closed to this person, this person, and this person.
Right.
Or you're in IT. Your job is to make sure we have the greatest technology. No, part of your job is to make sure everybody in the organization knows how to use the greatest technology.
Right.
Then you get a return on the investment you made in that greatest technology. It's just a different way. It's a different way of thinking that until you've lived through it, and full disclosure, been burnt a couple times because you didn't know, then it's like, oh, I'm never going to forget that again.
That's true. One of the things I advise is to get out and meet people. You cannot lead well by, I know we're at home these days, but you cannot lead well by living in a silo and working in a
Yes.
silo and not getting to know if my work touches this part of the organization and it touches this part, what are the people who are represented and who should be at the table that's represented that's not at the table? Go out and meet people, introduce yourself to people. And one of the things that we see is that when it's time to get promoted, Then you want all of these things, right? I want this person to say something about me, and this person doesn't know me. And then you begin to realize how important it is because nobody knows you. And so now you want visibility. Build your own visibility.
Well, and if you want to talk about game changers, there's a great game changer takeaway that really resonates with people because it's personal. It's a benefit, what's in it for me kind of thing.
Hmm.
When it's time to make promotion decisions, there will be senior executives sitting around the table making
Absolutely.
these decisions. If there's five of them and three of them have never heard of you, you are not at the top of the list.
Correct.
And people are like, well, how would I get how would I get to meet them? You go meet them.
Right. Absolutely.
That's when I was early in my career. I forget what job I was even. It was like I was a manager, like a first line manager. I called up the CFO of the company. And I said, hey, they put me in charge of managing trade budgets for the sales organization. Can I come and talk to you about it? I never actually talked to him. I talked to his admin. She schedules the meeting. I showed up and he said, nobody from the sales department has ever come to talk to me. Why do you want to talk to me? I said, well, I'm new at this. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, you're running finance for the whole company. I thought you could help me. He leans back in his chair and he laughs and he's like, well, how much time do you have? I'm like, well, you're a lot busier than I am. He
Exactly.
set up a standing monthly meeting with me.
Wow.
And it was that simple. And, he ended up being there for a while and I ended up being there for 30 years. And, we became pretty close over the time, all because I didn't know. I was too dumb to know that, like, at my level, you shouldn't call the CFO.
But that's a good thing, right? Sometimes we're too smart and we get in our own way.
Exactly.
And so it took courage and he remembered you. And guess what? I'm sure he told you to go talk to this person or made a connection for you, but you were on his radar. And I think sometimes we miss that dynamic. We miss how important that is.
Well, and the interesting blowback part of this story is I get back to doing my sales manager job, and the guy three levels above me calls me into his office and he's like, I heard you were in the CFO's office
Right.
yesterday. I said, yes, I was. Yeah, yes, I was. And he's like, why would you do that? I said, well, you asked me to take care of this trade budget thing, and I don't really know that much about it. So I thought he knew more than me. And he's just like, could you please give me a heads up when you're going to do things like that? So
Right.
it was a learning experience all the way around.
It was, but what I want to say even to that though is it definitely was a learning experience. And what we do, there are consequences or implications to the decisions that we make.
Yeah.
But is the juice worth the squeeze? Now I know I could say that more sophisticated, right? But
That's one of my
but
favorite expressions, though, because everybody understands that.
everybody understand. Is it worth it? Because if I would have gone to talk to you, then perhaps in this, and maybe this has never happened to you, but then you want to go and speak for me, or you want this to be about you, or you take it over. Now, as a man, you may have never experienced that. But as a female, one of the things that I have observed is that when I've done things like that and my manager or head of the function shows up, then it becomes about them because now we're in a room and everyone is trying to get that visibility or the audience and be seen. And you create this competition of such because I've got to show the leader that I'm the leader or how smart and intelligent I am and I'm running this. When reality is that no, we're leaning towards my insights and what I'm sharing, and it was my idea. So, how do you advocate for yourself? How do you put yourself on their radar so that you can be seen? Because if you're allowing someone else to tell your story, you're allowing someone else to put you in a room, you may never get there.
Yeah, and they're grabbing the narrative, and it may not be exactly the one that you wanted.
Exactly. Right.
No, so this, I was talking to somebody the other day who said that exact thing. Like, I'm in a room with all these people that are higher levels than me, and it's tough for me to get an opportunity to speak, even though they're talking about what I do.
Right.
I said, and this is a fellow who's in his I think late 20s. It's a relatively early career. I said, have you ever heard of the meeting before the meeting? He's like, what? I said, you go ahead of time, you know who's going to be in the meeting, you got the meeting notice, you can read who's going to be there. You go ahead of time and say, hey, I want to make sure that I get to talk about this during the meeting. Can you give me an entree to talk about this? And chances are really good that they will do it because you've now demonstrated, hey, I'm interested and I'm prepared.
Right.
So it's dual benefit. You've identified yourself as somebody who prepares and knows your subject matter. And then you also get to present it in the meeting live versus having somebody one step removed talk about what you do. And they're like,
Love it.
oh, the meeting before the meeting. I'm like, yeah, when you get to a certain level, there's always a meeting before the meeting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can't
I
wait
said, you
until
don't
the
have to
meeting.
physically go see them. You can call them on the phone or whatever.
Right. No, that's great insight though, because that's true. I think we miss the opportunities, and sometimes people have never been taught the opportunity. So going back to what you were sharing about, or I don't know if you were sharing it this time, maybe it was another conversation we had about the management training programs and why they are so important. It's these type of things, and not just with manager training programs. I'm going to say high potential or just navigating the office politics if you're working in the space, right? Of how do you get your ideas heard? How do you ensure that your voice is being heard and in the room and you're being invited into those conversations? It takes place. You can't wait until the meeting to decide, hey, and you're trying to double dutch or jump rope and you're jumping in and you're not getting that opportunity. And then somebody says, which I hate, I just really wish I shouldn't say this. This is going to be so bad, but I'm not going to say it because it's too bad. But I just
Yeah.
wish that we could just tar and feather everyone who says, into Greg's point, in a meeting, into
Yeah.
Greg's point. And so
Like,
it's
well,
like,
then, I already made the point. You don't have to say it again.
right. Exactly. We got it. It's because you don't have anything of value to add, right? So you're piggybacking, but even learning how to piggyback off of someone's insight in a way that's meaningful. Are you taught that skill of how do you add on to what Greg says in a meaningful way, not just regurgitate exactly what he said, but you just said, and to Greg's point, so you can make sure that you were engaged.
And people get anxious. They feel like if they're in a meeting, they feel as if they should participate, which is
Right.
good. That's the right instinct. But you use the right words. How can you add to it? So one of the things, when I'm coaching people, I have this thing about how you should run a meeting that I train people on. It's a
Let's
one-page
hear it.
PDF. And I said, you don't do the thing you said. You don't reiterate what somebody else just said. It's a waste of meeting time. And you
Mhm.
got a bunch of really expensive people sitting around in a conference room or a Zoom call. Don't waste their time. If you can build on something they said, like, okay, I hear what you're saying there. Can we build on that a little bit because it brings up these questions? Well, now all of a sudden you have when you ask a question, everybody's
All right.
interested.
Yeah.
And, if you're asking smart questions that other people are sitting there that they have the questions, but they didn't ask, all of a sudden they start looking to you like, are you going to ask the next obvious question? Like you asked the last one. Can you ask the next one? Now, it's hard to do. It's practice, and people get embarrassed when they make mistakes in meetings because it is a pretty public thing.
Right.
You got to have thick skin and just say, "Yeah, okay."
Right.
The best baseball players have a 300 batting average, which means most of the time they're striking out of they're getting put out somehow.
That's true.
Now, in the moment when your face is like glowing red hot and you can feel yourself starting to sweat, you're not really thinking about your 300 batting average. Like,
So
I just
how do
went
you,
down in flames.
that's right. So how do you teach people, and this is not something we've talked about, but how do you teach people to maintain that poker face?
That's a tough one. You may have noticed since we've talked to each other a couple times, my normal disposition is poker face.
Mhm.
um, the most effective way, I'll say it that way, the most effective way I've seen is you have to get people to practice doing it. So I used to do sales training for a period of time when I was with Hershey, and they didn't call it practice back then. It was called role playing. And we would do a hostile role play, particularly for people that didn't like to do that. And I said, look,
That's
look,
good.
if you're going into Walmart's headquarters down in Bentonville, they are going to ask really, really hard questions, and they're going to be one after the other. So unless you get used to fielding really hard questions one after the other, you're going to go in there and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to be able to say anything. And it was pretty effective. People hated it, by the way. You know,
I
that
can
that
understand
type
that.
of that type of training people don't enjoy until after they've come out of their first big meeting and say, you know, that really worked. I didn't lose my
Right.
cool. I was
Mhm.
able to like keep my thoughts straight. You can't get that by thinking about it. You have to get that skill by doing it and practicing it in, not to overstate it, but a somewhat tense environment. That's how you learn things.
Right, absolutely. And I love that because that's something that we don't talk about, but absolutely being able to maintain your emotions is absolute. So let me ask you, what trends do you see shaping the future of business management and how should leaders prepare for them?
So the most obvious one, which is being possibly overexposed right now, is artificial intelligence or AI.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I, I use AI every day, but principally for research. And you can't take whatever response you get at face value. You have to, it's like having a conversation with somebody in your business. You can, these things are so sophisticated now, you can converse with them and test what they've given you. Like, okay, you know, I hear what you said about that, but I've also heard this. Did you consider that? And it's fascinating
Oh, love that. That's a
in a
good.
weird way how they start to respond. Yes, that is another thing you could consider, and you know, you should look at this as this and this. So, yeah, I think AI will change the way management's done. The one thing that it can't do yet, it may be eventually be able to do it. It can't initiate the thought. AI is reactive, which means you have to feed it prompts in their
Right.
language. You have to feed it prompts to get it to respond. So the better you are at managing those prompts, the better tool it will be for you. You know, it's Excel turbocharged a gazillion times,
Yeah.
you know, because it's not only quantitative, you've also got this text context now. That's a big one. The other thing I see happening is companies are returning to, and you know, I've been around long enough, I've seen this happen. There's sort of a sine wave. Companies are returning to management fundamentals.
Right. Mhm.
Like, oh, gee, we're in business to make money. What is the thing that makes us money? The way I say it is, why do people send you checks? You're a business, and nobody physically sends a check anymore. It's, you know, some electronic transaction. But why do customers send you money? That's what you should talk about at a management meeting because you very quickly get to, we provide a good service, etc., that's more valuable than our competitions, which leads you to the next question. Well, why is it more valuable?
Right.
You know, so you can have a really robust management discussion about that. And it takes you back to, okay, you know, what's our distinctive competitive advantage? How are we differentiated? It just takes you in so many productive and profitable, God willing, um, directions. And that is not there's always interesting things to talk about, but are they the most important thing to talk about?
That goes back to your manager meetings that you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
And how to have a productive meeting. And I think you're giving some clear insights into how to make your meetings productive and meaningful. I can't tell you how many meetings, and I'm sure you have as well, sat in meetings. And it's like, why are we here? What are we doing? And you never get to a decision, but you also don't know what you're talking about. And you're round robining the room, which drives me up the wall.
Uh,
No.
Well, and
I like
this
your
was,
facial expression.
I was working with an organization that had this deep-seated meeting dysfunction. So I started, it's one of the things they asked me to look at. So I started going to a lot of the meetings, all different functions. And somebody showed up at a meeting and said, "Why are we here?" And I said, if you don't know, you probably shouldn't be here. There was a gasp in the room. I'm like, no, seriously, if you don't know why you're here, you probably shouldn't be here. You obviously have nothing to contribute. Just go. And, that was one of the places where I introduced this meeting format that I have that said, here's the rules you have to follow to have a meeting. And this is how you conduct the meeting. And this is what you do after the meeting. And I have a fancy little acronym called PAIN because
Let's
people
hear
most think meetings are painful.
it.
So there's what's the plan? What's on the agenda? What is the intent of the meeting? That's the I. And so the person that said, "Why am I here?" They didn't know the intent of the meeting. And then the N is what's the next steps. If you follow through those four things, pretty rapidly you'll find out you're having really good meetings.
Right.
And people will stop going to meetings they don't need to go to,
Hmm.
which my view is they should be thanking everybody for that.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
thank God I don't have to go to that meeting at 8:30
Right.
this morning.
Exactly, exactly. And they will be more prepared when they get into the meeting and ready to contribute to the meeting.
Well,
That
and
sounds like
actually, I
my
got
guy.
this from another consulting client a number of years ago. It was a technical business. They were in a very technical, chemical driven business. They sent out pre-reads, and if you didn't have all the pre-reads 48 hours before the meeting, they canceled the meeting.
Love it.
I'm like, oh, that's
That's
pretty direct
absolutely necessary.
feedback.
Love it. And it's absolutely necessary because people are not prepared and you get all of the into Greg's point and you have nothing to add or the people who I love to say you love to dissent and talk about how everything is wrong, but you've not prepared to the point where you can add something meaningful and get us on the right path or make something better. But you can react to everything that's been said with your limited knowledge because you haven't done the work to
Yes.
add value to the conversation.
Well, I was sort of chuckling when you were going through that about the people that complain. So I was COO for a company for a while, and there was one of their people on their executive staff who prefaced almost everything they said in meetings with, "Well, the problem is." So I finally pulled the person aside and I said, "Okay, here's your challenge for the next meeting. You may not say those words in the next meeting."
What did they say?
What do you mean? I said, every time you say something, those are the first three things you say. Well, the problem is. I said, next meeting, you can't say that, period. So we're in the next meeting and he starts to say it and he catches himself and he looks over at me and he smiles. And I'm like, he got it. This is fantastic. He got it.
Exactly. Greg, before we wrap, I got a question for you. One last question.
Mhm.
I think you're going to know the answer to this. What are the most common mistakes that leaders make, and how can they avoid those mistakes? We've talked about some, but I'm pretty sure with your experience that you have more that you can share.
The most common, and I would go back to communications. They're either direct communications or they're somehow derivative from some deficiency in communication. So if your team doesn't have a clear idea of where it is they're supposed to go and what it is they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it, you could pick that apart and assign a bunch of different causes to it. But once you strip away everything, it comes back to communication.
Mhm.
That
Right.
that and you see these Gallup surveys and things like that. Lack of communication is still at the top of employee feedback for management outages every single year. I looked it up the other day. It goes back for decades. I'm like, wait a minute, like we've all known this for decades. it's not as easy to fix as you would think. Like it's actual work to fix this.
Right, right.
But that would be the one big one because you can go off in so many different directions. But if you can get yourself focused in on that and say, okay, I have to be conscious about how I communicate. What's our plan? What's the team that needs to be involved? How do they relate to their other teams? Because these things don't happen organically.
Right.
A business organization is an artificial construct. It's a bunch of things that you put together. It's not a living organism unless you bring it alive. You got to be the wiring in that artificial construct.
I love that you share that. It reminds me of a leader I worked with years ago. And one of my challenges with this particular person was that we didn't speak the same language. And I would share that with her all the time. I'm speaking English, you're speaking Chinese, although you truly speak English in your mind.
Yeah.
And so when it's coming out, it sounds like English to you. However, that's not what I'm hearing. There's always a gap and an opportunity between what you're thinking and what you're actually communicating, what you are saying and what you're doing. And so I began to give her examples, and it was driving me crazy. Here's what you said, but this is actually what you meant. And I,
Oh,
share with her, let's start recording what you say because there's a clear disconnect here between what you're saying and what your expectations are, what the realities are, and what's being produced. And part of that is because you're not taking the time to really understand what it is that the team is actually working on, what your role and contribution to that, and being able to give the information in the next steps. You're so concerned with not failing that you are, in a sense, you're not using the same language that everyone else is using. This is our floor. This is the language everyone else is using.
yep.
And this is something that you're saying. And there's a disconnect there. And it wasn't until then that she was able to say and step back and say, okay, I see what you're saying. But we would continuously have this, what I would call this dance that would drive me crazy.
Well, and
And go ahead.
that's super insightful because in this person's mind, if you would go back and ask them the question, they say, I already told you that.
Right.
You're like, no, actually you didn't.
Right.
But how do you bring that up with them in a way that they say, okay, I understand what you're saying. Words are coming out of my mouth, but they're not landing in anybody's ear in a meaningful
Right.
way.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It was driving me up the wall. And I was like, there's something here. I know I may not be the smartest or the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm definitely not a butter knife either.
Yeah.
And so I get it. And that was a game changer for us in our relationship because I was like, I'm not going to be able to work in this type of environment with this person. It's creating too much stress that I don't need for the work that we're doing. Going back to, like you were saying, meaningful work. The work
Right.
isn't purposeful and meaningful. This isn't Google. This isn't the White House. This isn't Apple or anything
Yeah.
that's great. This isn't a hospital where we're doing this type of work. So is it really worth the stress that's coming into my life with this type of leader and the opportunity for leadership communication? And so it required being able to do something differently. And it drove me up the wall because I was having to manage up, in a sense. And I'm like, I don't get paid to manage or coach you. However, for me to be effective at the work that I do while I'm here, I've got to do something different.
And that is the game changer part because that is so tricky.
Hmm.
Because when you're managing up, now all of a sudden you're running into some potential ego problems,
Absolutely.
and that's a minefield.
Absolutely.
So that if you can help coach people on that, they would be high-fiving you all over the place because it is so hard to do.
It is absolutely hard to do. And I would just be so frustrated. And my friends would be like, you know what you're doing, right? You know what you're doing. You always do this. And I'm like, but I don't want to do this here. I'm becoming a monster. I don't want
Oh
to.
wait, so you were the person everybody was looking at. Hey, Dr. Sharalyn, you gonna ask the next question? Hey, you
Right,
gonna ask the
exactly.
next question?
I'm getting the messages on instant messenger. People are messaging me, say this, asking, no, you ask your own questions,
Yeah,
or the town hall. And I'm like, nope, nope, nope. You got to take your own hits.
yeah.
But
Well,
Greg,
I
I
mean
thank you. Go ahead. I'm
that is
sorry.
part of leadership, though, right?
It is part of leadership, a part that we don't talk about, though, that we
Correct.
need to talk about. So we need to have you back to talk about that part alone, because that's something that we never talk about, is that ego. What happens with the ego? Are you having to manage up and, dealing with those different people, right? Who may not
Hard.
necessarily be, it could be your manager, but it could also be, as you said, somebody cross-functionally. Being
Yes.
able to tell them, no, we can't do this, or yes, we can, or here's how this is going to work, and they're not necessarily your manager. And what about when you don't have your manager? You may not have ever experienced this as an advocate or supporter in those type of situations either.
Yep. That's tough.
Yeah. So we got plenty to talk about. So we got to have you back.
Fantastic.
I have loved every minute of it. So I got a question for you. I know you brought something special. I don't want to give it away for the audience. And I want you to kind of share with them where they can find more
Oh,
about
sure.
you, the work that you do, and how they could possibly work with you.
Sure. So the easiest way is to go to management mastery. It's all one word. Dot solutions. That's our website. There are free resources on there. That meeting mastery thing I described, you can get as a free download from there. It's one page, very intuitive, and oh, by the way, kind of hard to do all the time. It takes practice, but if you do it, you'll very quickly say, "Well, that was worth doing." But that management mastery dot solutions is the website, and the products and services we have are on there. There's a discovery call thing you can sign up for. It's pretty simple once you get there.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And there's a
Guys,
picture of me smiling, which is very unusual.
you have a beautiful smile. Very beautiful smile. So, guys, one of the things I want you to do is Greg is phenomenal at working with aspiring leaders. I don't know what I'm thinking about right now, especially. So, if you are an aspiring leader, or perhaps you're not an aspiring leader, you're already in a management position and you want to go to that next level and learn how to lead at the top and lead at a higher level. If you want to be what I would call moving from good to great,
Yep.
and deciding that you're going to be an exceptional leader, the leader that, when people go around the room and they say, who's the best leader you ever work with? And you want them to say you and your legacy to be leadership, then I strongly urge and encourage you to go to Greg's site, download the tools, take the action, do the work. And if you do the work, I truly believe you're going to get the results. You don't lead like everyone else, so your resources shouldn't look like everyone else's. I created the Game Changer Leadership Collection for high impact leaders like you, visionaries, change agents, decision makers who lead with intention and influence. This free high impact resource pulls from my leadership arsenal and delivers immediate actionable insights you can use right now to elevate your influence, lead with conviction, and drive lasting transformation. It's not just a toolkit, it's your first step toward leading at the level you were born for. Let me show you what's inside. The Leadership Edge Sampler. It's a preview of my 10 daily power skills to sharpen your influence and impact. The Influence Language Mini Guide. Essential phrases to increase your authority and build trust in every room you walk into. The Leadership Blind Spot Snapshot. Because the greatest risk are the ones we don't see. The power of one visual aid. A reminder that even one decision, one tone, or one conversation can shift a team or stall a movement. The Executive Briefing Checklist, a go to tool for high stakes communication that drives clarity and alignment. The 5 minute accountability brief, a no fluff framework to build a culture of ownership fast. And we have the Game Changer Ascension Model Overview, my proprietary leadership growth map to help you scale your influence with intention. These are the very same tools I use with executives, culture shapers, and elite teams, leaders who know what's at stake and aren't here to play small. Because when you're called to shift systems, influence nations, and build legacies, you can't afford to lead on autopilot. This is where your next level begins. Download the Game Changer Leadership Collection today. It's free, it's strategic, and it's built for leaders who are born to shift the game. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, and this is your Leadership Edge. Thank you for joining me on the Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where we don't follow trends, we set them, and we don't just lead teams, we shift legacies. If today's message challenged, stretched, or inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, tag it, lead through it, because real leaders don't just consume wisdom, they multiply it. Want to go deeper? Subscribe to the Ultra Influential newsletter for exclusive tools, behind-the-scenes strategy, and weekly mindset shifts for the leader ready to move nations, markets, and minds. Visit www.smpistrategies.com or send a note to leadership@smpistrategies.com. And if you're ready for next level coaching or consulting that positions you as the right leader at the right time in the right place, let's talk. This is what we do, and we do it with precision, power, and purpose. Remember, change isn't just something you lead, it's something you become. Stay bold, stay brilliant, stay a game changer.